So I think most of you have been on one of these calls before, and as you can see, it's not Kevin today. It's me, Natasha Day. I'm one of the senior planners in the Island Plan Review team, and I've been quite close to the community infrastructure work, so I'll be taking you through that today. But on the call, we also do have Kevin. You can probably see on the bottoms of your screens there. So Kevin will be fielding some any questions or issues as we go. So as with the previous sessions, we just need to quickly go through a few basic house rules. And first of all, that is that please keep your camera turned off and keep yourselves on mute. Raise your hand or use the chat if you do have a question that you would like to ask. We are recording this session and the webinars will be posted as soon as we're able to get them up online. It normally takes about a week or so for those to go up. And please do respect each other's thoughts and opinions if you may agree or disagree as we get into the discussion later on. And of course, as with the previous sessions, if you've got any specific issues that you would like to discuss in any more detail, we'll be having a one-to-one session available on this Friday, as with previous events, where you can book, and it will be myself taking those sessions. So again, apologies to those of you who've seen a number of these webinars now. I will take you back through the kind of basic overview of the draft plan and the strategic context, which is going to obviously be slightly more tailored towards the community infrastructure policies. First and foremost, and then we'll dive into the detail of the community infrastructure chapter, and then talk a bit at the end about how you can engage. So in terms of the consultation, we are, as you know, live with the Bridging Island Plan consultation. It's a 12-week consultation event started on in the 19th of April and it'll end on the 12th of July. All of the information about the island plan is available at gov.je/island plan, and there you can see this button, big centre on that page, which will take you through into the consultation, and there you'll find a downloadable copy of the plan and also the associated maps. So this is when you arrive at the consultation portal, this is what you'll see. So as to give your views, you need to look for this part here at the bottom where it says give your views, and then the plan is chunked up into chapters. So you have to go into the chapter that you would like to comment on. You can comment on as many or as few chapters as you like. If you've just got one particular issue that you want to talk about, then all you need to do is fill in the chapter, the part that says about you, and then provide your answers relative to the issue that you would like to talk about. In terms of the programme, we are a way through, obviously, the development of the draft island plan. Much of the work has obviously happened before this stage in developing the plan. But from this point going forward, not only are we in the 12-week consultation, but we also lodge the plan with the States Assembly. So that means that States members are able to lodge and propose their own amendments to the plan, which will be considered alongside the public comments and also later by the independent planning inspectors when they kind of take the reins to review the plan. So shortly after this stage ends, we'll be handing the plan, its evidence base, the consultation responses, the States member amendments, and then the Minister's initial response to those comments and amendments over to the independent planning inspectors, who you may have seen in the media have already been appointed and are currently reviewing the plan and its evidence base as part of their strategic familiarisation period. They haven't yet officially started work. They don't do that, the actual examination part, until we hand over to them, which will be around about the first week of August. So once they take over, there'll be a series of things that happen. That will include inviting comment on their list of matters to be heard, and also inviting second round representations on those key matters, and then we'll have some examination and public hearings, and those hearings are expected to happen in the autumn, around about late October, early November time. and they'll last a week to 2 weeks. And depending on the matters to be heard, you may be invited to contribute to that. Thereafter, the independent inspector's report will be published. We expect that to happen around Christmas, New Year's time. The minister will consider that and then present the report and an initial response paper to the States Assembly, and at the same time, obviously, make it public, which will then trigger the opening of a subsequent round of States member amendments. So, while States members have had the opportunity to comment on the plan at this early stage, um, having considered everything that's said and done throughout the examination and in light of the inspector's report, there may be some matters that they either have a slight change of heart on, or the new evidence leads them to feel differently about an issue. So they have an opportunity to refine their amendments before an ultimate debate is it takes place in March. And the Minister for the Environment at this point also makes his amendments for the first time, having heard not only the consultation amendments, EIP, and subsequent states member amendments. So as you can see, there's still quite a lot to get through. This is the beginning, so it's all very much to play for in terms of this is obviously the draft plan, and a lot of work has gone into getting us to this stage. But it's really important that we hear views so that we can refine the plan throughout this process. So in terms of the consultation event schedule, as you can see by this calendar, we're now more than halfway through our kind of main block of events. Today is our community infrastructure session, and on Wednesday we will be talking about minerals waste and water, but actually that's more minerals waste and utilities. We're going to be sending an update to the Eventbrite page later this today. We're continuing with our roadshow events, which have been going well to date, and some of you may have been along to those. We're just dropping into the parishes with our banners and copies of the evidence base, and just generally being available for parishioners to talk to us directly about matters that are of concern to them. This week we are at St One's, St Mary's, Grouville, and on Saturday at Trinity Parish Hall. And that will then conclude our 12 Parish Roadshow. If you haven't had a chance to come down to see us today, then do pop along. As I said, we're happy to talk about any issue relevant to any parish. Obviously, the parish we go to is just to be accessible. If you live in St Clement's and you pop down to St One's, that's absolutely fine. We'd be very happy to see you there. So next week we have our final sessions, which is first of all on the minimising waste, environmental risk, and strategic infrastructure. That chapter will talk about not only the kind of construction waste element of things, but also quite crucially our proposed flood risk framework for the island, which is a new policy framework, and then some slightly less frequently used policies about things like the aircraft safety zones and the hazard zones around La Collette. And then the managing emissions chapter is effectively a new chapter, which is all things climate related. So again, encourage you to come along to those. So in terms of an overview of the draft plan, there is obviously the main document, the draft Bridging Island Plan itself, but that is accompanied by 4 proposals maps. There would normally be 2 with previous island plans, but because of the level of detail with the flood risk zones, we've had to split that out between a Part A and a Part B, just to ensure that the printed plans are as legible as possible. But when you engage with the GIS tool online, you'll see that all of that information is actually on the same map, because you can interrogate the GIS map, which means it can all be visible to you there. But those maps, the print versions of the maps are available to download on gov.je, and the link to the GIS proposals map is also available there. This is the main proposals map and the flood risk. And here are the town inset maps. And just to be clear, the town inset maps don't include any additional information on them. They're merely zoomed in for legibility. So in terms of the structure and content of the plan, And for those of you who are familiar with the 2011 Island Plan, you'll see that things have been moved around a little bit. We have divided the Island Plan up into 4 volumes that deal with issues that are most relevant. So the first part is all just about your strategic context. The second is about the strategic framework, which is basically the planning manifestation of all the issues that we talk about in the introduction. And then the volume 3 is your managing development. So that's your kind of day-to-day planning matters that are um, broken down on a thematic basis. And then on the fourth volume, that is our performance and delivery. So that talks about how the Island Plan links into the Jersey Performance Framework and how we will monitor the effectiveness of the policies that we have proposed. So we have 96 policies reduced down from what was 150 in the extant Island Plan. And the actual structuring of the policies themselves has remained the same. So there is a preamble or justification, as it's known, which sits before a policy box, which is blue, or a proposals, in some cases, a proposals box, which is green. So in terms of the structure and what it means, we have obviously tried to make the plan clearer and more accessible and easy to use. And this diagram here, I guess, just sets out what we've tried to do. So we want all of the plan to be considered within its strategic context. That's particularly important, and that helps to explain the hows and whys we have the policy framework that we do. And then we bring that into the strategic policies and places chapter, the places chapter being entirely new, where it talks about the Bridging Island Plan manifestation, as I said, of all of those issues and what that means, and when applied to the thematic policies that sit within. And then those managing development policies are, I said, thematic issues that talk outwards to the strategic priorities. So the places chapter in particular is very useful to better understand what level of development might be acceptable, relevant to the place that the development is proposed to happen. So concentrating development into St Helier as our primary centre, and you would have heard that we've proposed for Lekeneve to become our secondary centre. So they are more sustainable locations for development, but we also want to ensure that we continue to protect our countryside and coastal areas, and it's all explained in that chapter. In terms of the evidence base, again, many of you will be familiar with this by now. There's an extensive evidence base published on gov.je/Island Plan. You could also get it through our consultation portal. We've been talking about some of this evidence base based on the issues of the thematic webinars as we've worked through them. So I'll be talking to you about a couple of them today. One thing I will bring to the attention of you as you're on the call is that we have been waiting for the sustainability appraisal report to be finalised, and I'm happy to say that that was published last week. So that is now available on gov.je. So not only the sustainability appraisal report itself, we also have a non-technical summary and then the technical annex that looks at a number of the housing sites and scores those. So if you haven't yet seen that that's been published and you're interested, please do go to gov.je and have a look at that independent report on the sustainability of the plan. So I spoke a little bit earlier with the circle diagram about the relationship of all of these policies and the volumes. So I won't go into it again. I'm just going to dive straight into the context of the community infrastructure chapter. So you would have seen this in earlier webinars. For those of you that have joined, it's just basically a key for the tables that follow. We've marked where a policy is essentially unchanged, where a policy has been changed in some particular way, and where there is a new policy that is not currently in the island plan. So this is just to help you navigate where the issues are new or not particularly new. So starting with the strategic policy framework, obviously not all of these are particularly relevant to the community infrastructure chapter, but we feel that these three are most relevant. So the spatial strategy, as I mentioned before, is we want to concentrate development into the most sustainable locations, and that doesn't only mean putting more development where there are existing facilities. It also means that we will actively support the provision of additional facilities in those locations, not only to support the communities that already live there or may live there in the future, but also recognizing that they are more accessible and therefore less likely to lead to increased vehicle movements. We have a new strategic policy in placemaking, and this really focuses on the livability of the built environment. So it really stresses the importance of having not only all of the things that we need as a community, but creating places that communities want to live in and be. And then we have the final strategic policy, which is planning for community needs. So it's very, very specifically about ensuring that we provide for what we need, and ties back to the placemaking SP about ensuring livability. So here is just a map setting out where the spatial strategy exists across the island. We've got obviously the town as the primary centre, the west of the island, secondary centre here for Lekeneve, and I appreciate you can't see the distinction between the other colours so well, but we have our local centres across the coast here, and essentially your village centres across the island, and then your smaller, more remote settlements just dotted around here. So the spatial strategy is quite important for the application of the community infrastructure chapter, because it determines how much community infrastructure would be acceptable relative to where it is on the island. So as I briefly summarised these three key policies here, this is the placemaking chapter, so I've just highlighted the three points in particular that are of relevance to the delivery of community infrastructure and placemaking. I think one of the key things is about the higher standards of accessible and inclusive design that is well connected and creates successful and comfortable public and private spaces, active frontages, streets, and links for all that work as social spaces, supporting well-being and healthy living, enabling successful integration into a place. So again, stressing the planning significance of creating livable places for people to be. And then we have the strategic policy SP7, which again is all about the community, but in particular relevant to the chapter that we're discussing today is making sure that we have the physical infrastructure requirements that are needed as a result of development. So that's essentially what developers must provide to manage the impact of the new people that will be living in an area, that reducing the potential for crime and fear of crime. I think that's particularly relevant for the design of our open spaces, where we have the congregation of various types of people, and making sure that the infrastructure that we do provide is resilient to future and changing needs. So that's not just a climate resilience thing, it is about our changing characteristics of the community, be it an aging demographic, or a shrinking or expanding younger people's generation. So in terms of the places policies, we have the plan for town in the development in town policies, and we've got Lekeneve, and also of particular relevance is our coast, countryside and marine environment policies. The reason why I haven't highlighted the local centres and smaller settlements policies is because really when it comes down to the provision of community facilities, whilst particularly local centres we hope will benefit from the provision of community or enhancement of community facilities, they will not be the primary focus. So as has been raised in a couple of the other webinars, we have a plan for town proposed in the Bridging Island Plan. So that seeks to do a number of things, focusing on 8 concept statements that frame how we envisage development to come forward in town. And we've developed this in recognition that whilst we continue to focus more development in the town, we need to do more to ensure that we manage the impact of that. So in particular, this recognises the need for more open space and play space, improved public realm, better countryside access, and enhanced urban biodiversity, which, whilst more of a natural environment issue, will of course benefit significantly from having more open space and connectivity across town, which is best here. So in the plan for town, under the restore concept, we highlight these policies that are particularly relevant to the delivery of the plan for town, which is the provision and enhancement of open space, protected open space, which is how we continue to preserve the space that we already have, countryside access and awareness, which will be in support of getting people to move out of town and into the countryside for leisure pursuit. And also we have the key proposals in there of the development of a country park and Granville Reservoir, which I will come on to shortly. So as I said, the countryside, coast and marine environment policy is particularly relevant to the community infrastructure chapter, given that we have provided greater flexibility for the development of facilities where an impact is limited and where there'll be health and well-being benefits. So this policy PL5 is perhaps the closest thing we have to what was the green zone and coastal national park policies in the current plan, where it talks about what type of development would be acceptable. In the countryside and coast, and I said we very specifically here provide the flexibility to deliver some community enhancements where they are appropriate and will be of benefit to islanders. So I think my slide was slightly out of order there, just jumping back to Le Canave. Um, as mentioned before, we hope to see a better concentration of development into Le Canave, and that's not about putting more development there. It's about supporting Le Canave in becoming a more sustainable community in its own right. And I think we've had some questions about whether or not it's appropriate to put more facilities out into the west of the island, which is remote from St Helier. And actually, the idea is that there is already a large community in the west of the island, not only concentrated around the Kenave, but in the other western parishes that would benefit significantly from improved facilities, and it will reduce the need to travel to town. So whilst it is remote from town, that's not to say it's not a sustainable location for the people that live nearby. And it also recognises that it's a very well used part of the island already. It has a lot there. I think it just needs a little bit of extra support in the island plan to enable more improvements, not only to community infrastructure, but also from the economic side of things in terms of retail and opportunities for places to work to come forward in the coming years. So moving in to the community infrastructure chapter, I think I'm going to touch on most of these policies with you in one form or another, and I'll probably pause after each part just to if there's any questions that anybody would like to ask. Appreciating that we go through lots of different aspects of community infrastructure in this session. So that's just the second page. So you see there's a number of policies and proposals in this chapter. So the key evidence base that has been used to inform the development of this chapter, as you can see in front of you here, these are the key reports. With the community infrastructure capacity study has been mentioned in a number of webinars. So it covers both hard and soft infrastructure based on its current condition and capacity and applies that to a future projection based on the growth scenarios that we have proposed in the Bridging Island Plan. So it helps to give us a good feel for what the impact of the development will be on various types of infrastructure in the short to medium term. And this piece of work will help us to do a subsequent piece of work, which will look at the delivery of an infrastructure plan for Jersey, and that is highlighted in the strategic proposals part of the plan, which you may have not found. The Community Facilities and Open Space Assessment of Sites report is a combination of the call for sites submissions that were received seeking improved community facilities and open space, and then also a review internally of Government of Jersey requirements where they were known and or are anticipated, and that includes education facilities and, as you can see in the next document, the Inspiring Active Places strategy, which was under development concurrently to the development of the Bridging Island Plan. And that strategy itself was published just merely a few weeks before the Bridging Island Plan was, so they were developed in tandem. And then for those of you that have come across me previously will be aware that we've done some work a few years ago to look at open space in St Helier. The Open Space Survey report was published in 2018. However, the audit has only just made it onto gov.je. But as you can see by the date, it was undertaken in 2018. So the audit of St Helier Open Space looked at how much space we currently have relative to the size of the population in town. And the size of the population was taken from the 2011 census, modelled up based on the population estimate of the day. And that's helped us to establish a baseline for how much space we have in town, not only by size of population, but also in terms of walking distances around different areas. Does anybody have any questions about the evidence base before I progress? No? Oh, John, hi.
Yeah, I put a couple of questions up in the chat relating to the fact that I feel one of the problems we have is I'm not sure how well the island plan that you're working on is integrated into any evidence for the population policy. I mean, there's certainly evidence out there. I know we have got a population policy in place, but I'm concerned that your document, and I'll just give you an example, you're talking about that the fact that I'm talking about schools and primary school places, etc., that birth rates have dropped in recent years, I'm quoting, and the net migration level for children remains close to zero. But I figure we're going to see a bit of a mini explosion post-COVID after a year in lockdown, and then with increasing population and particularly people coming in for jobs, you know, that's a younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
I can see, you know, there's going to be a need for certainly more nurseries and obviously, you know, ultimately primary schools. And I just wonder, my first part of my question is how you tie this current island plan into the evidence you've got for the increase in population and the ongoing effects of that. And then why can't we tie the island plan timing to the census? I mean, that's so logical, it's beyond belief. And I don't think the argument is put forward by the census officers that they like to tie it into the UK census is really strong enough argument to not have it aligned with the island plan. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think I'll probably start with saying that the whole reason why we've developed a Bridging Island plan is in recognition of the longer term uncertainty, particularly around population change in Jersey, where it is going to be different to other parts of the world, being an island nation and having migration controls, and also that is made no less certain by the fact that we've undergone Brexit and have a new set of migration controls, which entirely changes well, potentially changes the population characteristics or inward migration characteristics into the island going forward, and that's regardless of having a population policy in place. So that's why we've done this bridging island plan, and that does enable us to take stock of where we are in the subsequent island plan, and it makes sure that what we're doing here is not taking us too far into the long term, where we don't really know what is going to be happening, and then that sits quite nicely with the development of the infrastructure plan, which will also do the same, and it said the timing of the census, I think, is as well. You know, the bridging, we've always had this problem with the development of an island plan, that the census comes on the same year that the new island plan comes, and obviously that doesn't give us chance to respond to the census. However, by having a bridging island plan, it does allow us to recalibrate. So we will have the outcome of the census in terms of the high level population numbers by the end of this year, which means that if there is any significant shift in our numbers that we hadn't anticipated, we will still have time through ministerial amendment or states member amendment to deal with any major changes that we, if we did need to make them. It's not too late for this census. And then, of course, the development of the subsequent island plan will be happening in the right order. And then that will set in train a new pattern of 10-year cycles where the census will be happening before the island plan comes forward. I hope
Okay.
that helps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So the the end of this short-term island plan, will you then just make up that gap with a not another 10-year plan, but say a 7-year plan, so that you stay on track, or will you perhaps try and align with the census?
No, no. So we would be doing a full 10-year plan, and in a normal world where we have the gift of time, a island plan can take around about 2 to 3 years to develop. So, and by that, that's the time to write it, and also the time for it to go through that process that we discussed earlier. Which, even with a fair wind as we have now, that's still an 11 month to 12 month process. In a normal world, we'll be looking at an 18-month process of the plan actually being in draft to becoming approved. So, by the census, I mean, it's the high level population numbers that we expect this year. We don't actually expect the full census report until next year, which is when the Bridging Island plan will become approved. But that will then stand us in perfect timing to start the development of the subsequent island plan, which we'll need to do quite soon after the development of this plan. We will have a fresh data set of the entire census at that point.
Okay, so will we ever see a match between the census and island plan?
I
Just,
think,
just, just,
yeah.
just, just to add, John, I think the whole issue about carrying out a 10-year census is something that both is in question in the UK and also in Jersey, in the sense that there are a range of other data sources that statisticians can use to monitor population change. So it may be that the current format of the census, whereby it's done on a single night, where all islanders are required to fill out a form, maybe something of the that won't happen in the future, and various data sources will be used to have a more continual monitoring of population levels over time. So, as Natasha said, where we can, we seek to ensure that the island plan data is based on the latest available evidence, and clearly the census this year will give us the opportunity to reset that in terms of the subsequent island plan review.
Okay, that sounds very sensible. Obviously, in this digital age, there should be ways and means so that we
Yeah,
don't. Really, the census was based on the old-fashioned idea of
that's right.
people filling in paper forms. But now, with
That's
the
right.
advent of the internet, etc., we should be able to have a rolling census to some extent. Okay, thanks for the answers.
Okay. So going back into the thematic policies, we have here in front of us the education facilities. So as John has just mentioned there, and as I've touched on previously, the infrastructure capacity study, which looks at both hard and soft infrastructure, confirms that capacity does exist across the education estate, and that the population increase that we see on the island is not mirrored to school place demand. And there are some, beyond me, if I'm honest, it's for our colleagues in education to to calculate school place demands, but there are some complex demographics and calculations that go into figuring out what we need, and they're generally able to predict 4 years in advance, and that's because it matches to the birth rate on the island. So when there's a peak or a trough coming into the system, generally education have a reasonable amount of time to prepare for that. So if they need to add in an additional form of entry, for example, because of a busy birth year, they will be able to do that, or they might temporarily adjust the school catchments in order to deal with that. And that's considered to be business as usual for education. It's not any different to what they normally do. Even 20 years ago, they would manage the peaks and the troughs in demand by predicting the place requirements a few years in advance. So what is also acknowledged, however, in both the Bridging Island Plan policy introduction to this, and also in the infrastructure capacity study, and is widely recognised across the island, is that the St Helier primary schools are facing greater challenges, and that's not just around capacity, it's also due to the age of facilities and the amount of space that the schools have available to them, outdoor space obviously in particular. So all of these issues are just part of a bigger package of thoughts, issues and considerations that education are chewing over at the moment, and that is taking the form of both the review of the education estate and actually the education reform programme, which is reconsidering how we deliver education on the island from nursery age children through to tertiary and further education. So it's a bigger picture thing, rather than just dealing with our issues of today. It's about modernising how we deliver education on the island into the future, and considering how we best use our physical building assets to do that. So that's why there's obviously been much discussion in the media in particular about Rouge Bouillon School, why making decisions to designate lands in the plan where that work hasn't yet been fully undertaken or concluded isn't how we've done this. We've tackled this with looking at where the needs are explicitly known, and there's more certainty, and where there is land available. But what we've said is that we will absolutely commit to work with the Minister for Education to undertake that reform programme and review of the education estate, and we will be supportive of the development of supplementary planning guidance to ease them through any sites that may have some planning challenges as they may arise. But as I said, hopefully feeding into the development of site selection as and when that happens, to ensure that the sites are the right sites for education. So as I mentioned, where needs are known and land is available, the site has been safeguarded for education. So some of these came through our call for sites process. Greenville School, Jersey College for Girls and Montelabbé were all highlighted through the call for sites process, with sites and other landowners also offering land immediately adjacent to school facilities, recognising the opportunity that their land can present to the schools. You may be aware that the Montelabbé School in particular is in this year's government plan to undertake feasibility work for the bringing together of the primary and secondary school function at Montelabbé, and including some respite care offer. So there is an actual expansion of the campus. So we have designated the field to the east or southeast of the Montelabbé School, and the rest of the school sites that we have identified here are for amenity space, so improving the outdoor space requirements of those schools. And the bottom four, so that's Hope Valley, First Tower, St John's and Leland, are rolled over from the existing plan in the 2011 plan, where the sites were safeguarded but weren't brought forward over the plan period. So we are going to continue to safeguard those sites as the schools do still require them. Also of note is that there is a sequential test for releasing lands previously in education use to other forms of development. So where a building has served a community purpose, we would like to see it continue to serve a community purpose, even when its present use has become redundant. So additional evidence will always be required for education facilities. And as you'll see as we go through the chapter, other types of community uses have to provide similar amounts of information. Does anybody have any questions on education? Okay, so moving into the healthcare facilities policies. So not only CI2 healthcare facilities, it also embraces CI3, our hospital and associated sites and infrastructure. So the policy framework is centered around the delivery of the Jersey Care model, which many of you will no doubt be familiar with as work that's been ongoing for a number of years now. So it prioritises it basically improvements to healthcare facilities to enable the model to be realised, but also just recognising with or without the model that healthcare facilities are a very important infrastructure for communities. We safeguard the Overdale, our hospital site, in the plan, and that is in recognition of the States Assembly's decision of P123/2020 to agree Overdale as the site for our hospital. The policy framework sets the highest level of priority to enable the delivery of our hospital to come forward, and sets a series of considerations that we would be looking for in any planning application to come forward. It also acknowledges the infrastructure and relocation of services that are required, and sets out that we will deal with these by enabling and linked development. So you would have heard people talk about the highway to nowhere. If the road infrastructure, for example, was delivered, and then ultimately for whatever possible reason there could be, hypothetically speaking, the hospital wasn't delivered on the Overdale site, we would have safeguards in place to manage that through the process, and that would normally be by some kind of legal agreement that would set out additional clauses and measures for any such scenario should it come up. So before I press on, does anybody have any questions about the healthcare facilities or hospital designation? John?
Yeah, do we? I've just put in the chat. Do we know the revised timing for the planning applications for Overdale Hospital, and also for the refurbishment to the Lake Kennevay School, which is obviously going to be used to the current Overdale facilities? Because I understand that Lake Kennevay will need at least a year of work to make it suitable for use as a sort of overflow hospital facility to put all these facilities in, whilst Overdale is demolished and the new hospital is built. So can we have an inkling into that revised timing, and whether you know or not when there's a revised completion date for the new hospital?
I'm afraid I can't answer these questions. What we have here is the policy framework, but it's not the time. It's not anything to do with the timeline. That is down to the our hospital team. So I think you can get in touch with the team via their consultation pages online. So perhaps you could direct your query to them. Sorry, I can't help you further on that one.
Okay, it was worth the ask. Thanks.
Okay. Community facilities and community support infrastructure. This is a slightly expanded policy. It previously focused on community facilities in the plan. We've embraced community support infrastructure as a different type of thing. So in the preamble to the policy, it explains that community support infrastructure are those other types of building that aren't freely accessible to the community, but which the community are actually dependent on in one way or another. So that could be police ambulance fire facilities, or it could be the provision of facilities for looked after children and other care facilities. So by increasing the scope of those policies to include that type of community support infrastructure, it means that those facilities will be considered under an appropriate framework, whereas previously they would have just been considered under the generic policies of the plan without any specific mention or priority in recognition of the really crucial role that those type of facilities play for the community. As I mentioned earlier, this policy also has a test for releasing the land for other forms of development. As it's already in community use, it's just essentially a redundancy test rather than a sequential test out of its use. Any questions on community facilities and support infrastructure? Okay. The sports, leisure and cultural facilities policy, it identifies 5 sites as the sports and leisure enhancement areas, and this is largely aligned to the Inspiring and Active Places strategy, for those of you who have seen that. So it recognises that the Kennebec Sports Centre will undergo some form of redevelopment, and that's spoken about in the community a site assessment report as the evidence base. It recognises Lorkia School, but we've included an additional requirement in the plan that it doesn't any development of an East of Ireland sports hub, which is what the current plan is for Lorkia, which would be used by both members of the public and the school, is that we would not like to see that compromise the school's ability to deliver education on the site. So that would have to be proven. Of course, the school are involved with negotiations with our colleagues in infrastructure, housing and environment about the site, but we, as planning, would like to ensure that is safeguarded through the planning process too. The redevelopment of Springfield Stadium, we've added in an additional requirement for that site. Whilst it is in the built-up area, we would like to ensure that the site does not lose any of its freely accessible outdoor space that the public can currently enjoy. So the site is within the north of town area where the 2018 open space study recognised that is deficient in open space, but we also understand that the demographic kind of profile of people that live in that part of town, there is higher levels of deprivation, there is over occupancy of residential uses. So we would like to see the community infrastructure only enhanced, not diminished in the area. So again, it's a safeguard to ensure that as a public site that we continue to allow freely accessible space for use by the public. Other sites are the existing Jersey rugby site and associated pitches. For those of you that have travelled out west recently, you'll see that the new sports facilities nearly finished, and obviously the Jersey Reds have done particularly well over the course of their last decade, I suppose, and they've had a number of planning applications that have come forward in that time to improve the facilities. So what this policy is just saying that we would support a continued improvement of that site to enable the sport to continue. And then we have the key opportunity sites in the Southwest St Helier planning framework area. So whilst a specific site is not yet identified, it is of course an ideal location for sports, leisure and cultural facilities, and we
Just
would
worry about you.
be
Oh,
supportive of that to come forward. So in terms of the wider requirements of the policy, you'll see here in the, I suppose it's the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph, we have the redevelopment of the swimming pool and cinema in St Helier recognised, and we would like to ensure that town does not lose that as an asset, and so any planning application to come forward for its redevelopment will need to assure us that we have other facilities coming forward.
oh, this is why I stand up.
Sorry, bear with me 1 second whilst I just ask a colleague to go on mute. Thank you. So in terms of the sequential test, as I said previously, this policy has a sequential test that we would like to see any sports, leisure, or cultural facilities retaining in that use, if possible. If not, into some other form of community use reflective of the community's needs. Does anybody have any questions on this part? Okay. So moving into what is effectively the second part of the chapter, where it becomes open space focused rather than facilities focused. You'll see in the introduction to this chapter that we talk about open space relative to sustainable well-being and highlight a number of benefits of supporting the enhancement of open space both in town and across the island, recognising its role for healthy lifestyles, quality of life, social inclusion, resilience to climate change, biodiversity, custodianship of space and the importance of that in communities, protecting our cultural heritage. You'll know that many of our open spaces in town are listed places, and that provide a setting for important cultural landmarks across the island. And then also there's the added benefit of travel connectivity. So we've tried to improve the policy framework, the delivery and enhancement and also protection of open space across the island. We've identified some sites. We've proposed the adoption of benchmark standards for St Helier, and there is the link to the public realm improvements that are discussed in the travel and transport chapter of the plan. So the provision enhancement of open space policy requires developers to provide open space to the benefit of those who will occupy the development. So particularly for the larger scale developments, that's the provision of the communal spaces that are very important, particularly large scale residential developments, that they become the central hub of the development. Where there's in some urban locations an inability to provide outdoor space, communal space on site, we would expect that to be met with an off-site contribution, where we would look at areas of deficiencies in the nearby area and see how the developer can contribute to the improvement of that to the benefit of the residents that will be occupying the development. We've also proposed the safeguarding of 3 sites across the island for the provision of open space, and that is part of the Jersey Gas site, as an extension to Millennium Town Park, which has been spoken about many times in the past in the media not too long ago. We actually have supplementary planning guidance published for Jersey Gas, which seeks the safeguarding of that site but by bringing it into the island plan itself, it raises the status of that designation and requires it very formally through the planning process. We have the proposed designation of Warwick Farm as its next use to become a country park for St Helier, which I can talk to you a bit more about in a moment. And then we have the Granvaux Reservoir and Valley opportunity, which is discussed in the Countryside Access and Awareness policy, which again I'll talk to you about in just a moment. So the Warwick Farm proposal is it's been mentioned. It feels like throughout history in planning in Jersey as a potential site for open space. The Constable of St Helier, in particular, very keen to see this be realised to the benefit of town residents. And whilst it is remote from town somewhat, there is actually significant opportunity to improve connectivity through the woodland paths of Valley Devoe. And an opportunity to create some linkages to the Adelina Wood Arboretum for those of you that are familiar with that site lower down Le Grand Route de Saint John. So in order to bring this site forward, of course, we're all aware that the site is presently occupied, and the island plan doesn't disrupt that in any way. It is its approved use, and it's not for us to decide to extend to end that use. That would be really a decision of the States Assembly when they felt the time was right. However, the Minister for the Environment would support the realisation of the site as a country park by bringing forward supplementary planning guidance, which again would be subject to its own Oh, sorry, did I go mute in part of that? I didn't mean to, sorry. I don't know how much of that you didn't hear me say. When did I go out? Sorry.
Sorry, it's a bit slow to pick you up
That's
on that.
okay.
We lost at least 30 seconds.
At least 30 seconds. I think the end part was just saying that the Minister for the Environment would produce supplementary planning guidance to support the realisation of the site and take the opportunity to support the delivery of the Countryside Access Strategy, which is already adopted strategy of the Minister for the Environment. It was adopted in, I think, 2016. And has aspirations for creating a variety of opportunities, both through public and private land across the countryside to improve access for recreational purposes. Sorry, did anybody have any questions at all on the country park proposal? Okay. Policy CI8, space for children and play. For those of you who have, again, spoken to me before, you would have heard me talking about the open space audit and what we discovered in doing that work. And it was also recognised by some work that was done in 2008, an outdoor study, an outdoor open space study, is that as an island and in particular in town, we are very deficient in space for children and play. And that is typically quantified as outdoor play structures, but we look broadly to include ball courts and spaces just specifically designated for young people in our parks and other open spaces. So in recognition of our deficiency across the island, we have now got a policy that will require developers of 5 to 10 family homes. So by family homes, we mean of 2 bedrooms and more. So therefore likely at some point to have children living in them to provide communal space on site where this is possible. But recognizing that would be a smaller development, we would be only looking to kind of formally require an on-site provision for the larger developments of more than 10 homes. Either way, whether the provision is provided on-site or off-site, we're not explicit in what form that takes, and we recognise this for a number of different reasons, as is set out in the policy, that children don't see play areas as the structures that are provided for them as their top places to go and play. They like to explore the natural environment. They like to just sit with friends to talk. So we should recognise that and design space for children and play with children in mind. So that it would involve talking to children and doing a bit more work and research to make sure that the space that you're providing would be reflective of the needs of the children that would be potentially occupying that space. And if an on-site space isn't able to be provided, we would allow an off-site financial contribution for delivery by a third party. So that could be a body like Jersey Sports, for example, who have long had aspirations to deliver a play strategy for Jersey, or it could be the local parish, or an Andium offer, for example, where the open space will be in relatively easy proximity in terms of walking distance from the site. So you'll see here that a 10-minute walk or 1,000 meters is quoted because any play space offer beyond that distance is not considered to be reasonably accessible for young people. John, I see you have a question.
Yeah, just generality really. As we are increasing population and there's pressure, every time we talk about housing, everybody focuses on something. And I think it's important to save the spaces we've got and actually repurpose. I was going to just raise the question, just confirm to me perhaps about Springfield. I think that would be much better, as it's in the centre of, well, it's not quite the centre of town, but it's in an area that's very important to the development of the north of town, because there's so many more houses going there. I think Springfield should be totally repurposed as a community centre and open space, so like almost like a mini park. But we really need to consider that, parents, are leading busy lives these days, and they haven't got that sort of, half an hour to take the kids to the local park, 10 or 15 minutes away. They need facilities nearby. So although it's very applaudable to consider that new developments should have open space, we've really got to be looking at the town centre, and freeing up some of the zones we've got, freeing up our streets to allow not just play areas, but safe spaces. And that's, I think, one of the important things, that children must have safe spaces that they can gather. Even teenagers, they just need somewhere safe to just sit and talk and meet their friends, this sort of thing. And there should be, my purpose is to make lots of that available. So I think we must really look to save and expand on the zones that you're talking about, but not just larger spaces, but small spaces as well.
Yeah, I have to agree with pretty much everything you said there, John. Of course, we've targeted here the improvement of spaces for children to play relative to development, and that's just by the nature of an island plan that responds to development and guides development. There is a wider issue about play provision across the island, and in particular in town, and I think it takes a multi-agency approach to resolve that issue, which is, as I said, Jersey Sport in particular, very keen to develop a play strategy for Jersey in support and pursuit of their Inspiring and Active Jersey strategy, which recognises that the very clear health benefits of having suitable space available for children, both in a physical and mental health capacity.
Yeah, so just to remind you, something we perhaps keep losing sight of is children first. And that really should be the headline for everything we think and do about community.
No. Okay. So then we penultimately have the countryside access and awareness policy, which recognises the opportunities and encourages improved access to our valuable countryside, as I said earlier, both through public land and through private land, and it broadly aligns with the aspirations of the countryside access strategy, and in the justification to the policy explains some of the good things that have happened as a result of that work. Like, for example, St Peter's Valley Path, creating a north-south link to the west of the island. We've had the Eastern Cycle Route Corridor, I suppose, which helps the east of the island. We've had some smaller scale improvements across private land, particularly around the north of the island. And if you go to gov.je and search the countryside access strategy, you'll be able to access an online map which shows you where all of the different types of open space are across the island, access routes are across the island, so that from bridle paths to kind of more suitable multi-user paths across the countryside. So it's a particularly useful tool if you wonder where you can and cannot go in terms of rambling through the countryside. Do check that out on gov.je. So what we've done here is, again, this is something else that came as a result of the open space work done in 2018, was recognizing the opportunities to improve links into the countryside to town. And as you can see here, the Granvaux Reservoir sits just immediately to the north of Granvaux, which is like a northern artery of the town centre. has a high proportion of social housing developments, but also has a well-connected pedestrian route from town up until the point that you reach the school, actually. So it is even more so than Warwick Farm, a significant opportunity to get people out into the countryside by improving the accessibility of the reservoir. And we have been speaking with Jersey Water about how this may be realised in terms of creating a pedestrian path around. So there's already a small bridle path for those of you that are familiar with the reservoir, but it's not presently accessible to the public. So we would like to see that path kind of increased and formalised to allow a full walking route around the site. It not only as a leisure improvement, but also as a highway safety improvement, given that there is no pedestrian footway around the path, and then opportunity for both open space and walking routes into the north. So as you can see in the image here, this lighter patch in the middle of the site is the Jersey Water, their storage depot for the large mains pipes that are installed across the island. There's actually quite a significant amount of open space here, so the relocation of their operation would be able to free up that part of the site for like a mini country park, if you like. But again, this is all predicated on Jersey Water being able to do that. They are very supportive of it, but they have operational needs that they would need to resolve before the site could be realised. So this is manifest as a proposal in the plan, and we would support Jersey Water in the development of supplementary planning guidance to ensure that the site makes the most of the opportunity for the community. Does anybody have any questions on this policy? Okay. And finally, in the chapter, we have the policy for allotments. So we've always had a allotments policy in the island plan. For those of you that are familiar with the current one, it doesn't say very much, and it isn't particularly encouraging. We've been quite surprised by allotments being a relatively hot topic in the island plan world. It was mentioned a lot during the in-committee debate on the island plan last year, where we spoke about the bidding plan with states members, and the benefits of allotments were discussed by states members extensively, particularly for town residents, and recognised for the opportunities that they present people who live in urban areas who don't have the luxury of large garden space to grow their own produce, or just to be outdoors and enjoy a bit of leisure gardening. So we had a look at this policy in a bit more detail and sought to improve the ability to bring forward allotment sites on lower quality agricultural land and in locations that we hope to be more sustainable. So in and around the existing built up areas in particular will be supported, but we would also support sites that are accessible by public transport. Of course, it would go against our wider objectives to improve people's use of the transport network is if we supported sites in particularly remote locations. So we wouldn't like to see very remote sites coming forward, but if it represented a better use of that land to the benefit of the community, then the policy would allow the consideration of that type of use. Does anybody have any points on allotments? Hi, John.
Yes, sorry, me again. Yeah, I don't like the word allotments. I prefer community gardens because that's the modern alternative, and it is much more efficient. It's. I mean, if I compare it, I'm down at Castle Keen. I look at the marina, and there's so many boats down there that don't get used. And it's the same with allotments. Some people use them very well. They're very good gardeners, and some get neglected. But a community garden, the whole of the land is not wasted. Everybody uses it, and everybody benefits from it. And people learn because they have people. If we move towards my garden city idea that would have income, you'd actually have professional gardeners guiding people. So can we use the word community gardens instead of allotments?
Yeah, well, I think you do hear community gardens a lot more, but they do have different meanings. So allotments are private plots, and community gardens are community plots. So I think maybe rather than swapping the terminology, it might be allotments and community gardens would be a more appropriate description based on what you're saying.
Yeah, okay. Well, if we can just amend it to include that. So. maybe the two together.
By all means, submit your comments online, and we'll take that into consideration.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay, so that's got to the end of the review of the policy framework. Does anybody have any questions at all on the, or anything to say about the community infrastructure chapter? No? Okay, on that basis, I will move on to conclude. So, as we've said at every webinar, we really want to hear from you if you have something to say about this chapter. You can do this in a number of ways, and you can attend another themed webinar. We've got a lot more still to talk about in the plan until the beginning of June. We'll be having these sessions. We are continuing our parish drop-in sessions for the rest of this week, where they will then become concluded. And then you can find all of the information on gov.je. And if you have any issues at all, you could email us at islandplan@gov.je, and we will happily direct you towards the right page on the website. We will be issuing the booking link to these planner surgeries that are happening at the end of this week. As I said, we'll have both the bookings for community infrastructure and also the minerals and waste session that's happening on Wednesday. Those will be available to book for Friday as well. Depending on how the rest of the consultation goes, and if there proves to be demand, we may run more one-to-one sessions, perhaps later into June, should anybody want some advice and support to consider the evidence base of the plan or the development of their representations. And of course, in this process, you really must submit your comments formally. So it's useful to discuss the issues in person, and it's helpful to us as well to hear your opinions. However, the only way this can be considered is if you submit your comments formally online or in writing to us, which will then be considered by the Minister for the Environment and later on by the independent planning inspectors. And that's it. That's the end of the webinar. So thank you very much. And I'll give you one final opportunity to raise your hand if there's anybody who would like to ask a question or have anything to say, which I think is not. So thank you all very much. And I hope to see some of you again at our next webinar. Thank you.